Okay. Not always sure that it's recording, so now I have to turn around and check. And it looks like it is. So there we are. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the what we're doing now, I have to make a new resolution. Not to start videos until I know exactly what I'm going to talk about or how I'm going to present myself, right? I can't just go turn it on and go, No, it's more like you got to turn it on and actually do something. You can't be ambivalent. So note to self, going forward, press start or record when you actually have something to say. And in my case, I always have something to say. So that's why I just click OK or click start. And then I go, and I talk and then I go, I kind of forgot what I was going to be recording. Anyway, that happens. Go with it, live with it, live in the moment, whatever. All right. So it is interesting. What's interesting, Terry? What's interesting is this dichotomy, if you will, between simplicity, accuracy, and playability, and how fast or how long you want the game to last. Okay, given. Nobody wants the game to last longer than what is appropriate. So what's appropriate? Well, today is way different than it was in the 70s. Okay? When I was just starting out, okay, you can guess. 1972, 73, people had at that time for games that lasted hours. You'd go to dinner and come back and you'd finish the game, or you wouldn't finish the game. That was the other thing. There were many times in Mississauga when we started a game and we would never finish it. And there would be huge amounts of effort involved. And the game would never resolve. We'd get a nice game. It would be really cool. A lot of it was Russian front, World War II. And there was some Napoleonic stuff too. So yeah, big games. Back in those days, 18 foot long by 5 foot deep was not unusual. Or however many equivalent in meters it was. All right. Now, how much time have you got? About an hour, if you're lucky. So what does that mean about my first statement? Simplicity, speed, etc. Well, you want to have, depending on the technology that's being represented, and for us, when we talk about Hex Command NOVA, it's our version of the mech universe, the BattleTech mechanized future of tomorrow. On hostile and sometimes formidable, not good places to be, formidable planets, hostile environment, yada yada. Which is another whole thing. I mean, why are you, for one thing, trying to take a planet or a continent on a planet that has an environment, a atmosphere that's hostile to living things? Well, resources. It may be a rocky planet with no atmosphere, but boy, does it have a lot of gold. Does it have a lot of silver, titanium, minerals? Okay, there you go. I mean, there's a reason for it. Well, why can't you just send robotic things to go down there and mine? Well, the other guy's going to do that too, hence you got the conflict, right? That's why we're all here. So the technology being implemented, represented, is one thing. And how you interpret that to make the game fast enough for humans today that they don't go, oh, God, I'm so tired of playing this. Oh, it's going on and on. So much detail. It's so complicated. Our games are simple. Our Hex Command series are simple, and we still forget stuff. We still misinterpret stuff. So it's a given. You're going to forget. You're going to misinterpret. You're going to do something wrong. Compensate, right? Get ready for it. Do something. But the point is, the whole point of this, right, is to have fun playing this game. And then our example here is Hex Command NOVA. So there's this thing about projectiles. And okay, here's where the complications come in. You want to get them resolved. You don't want them to be too complicated in a mechanical sense for players to adjudicate. But you also want to have some level of accuracy. In the traditional Battletech universe, though, they have attempted to simplify. Or the CAV universe, they have attempted to simplify. For us, we have attempted to simplify. You still have to have a roster, or if you don't, we'll talk about that in a minute, but if you have a roster, a thing in your hand, pen and paper, you're recording the hits that are happening to the machine. There's two aspects, and this is where I started talking about that. There's projectile weapons, kinetic weapons, and then there's energy or beam weapons. Does a beam weapon affect a target the same as a projectile weapon? Okay. Is the damage caused based on the weight energy power of a beam weapon the same as the equivalent projectile weapon? Okay, imagine this. An 88 millimeter anti-tank gun fires at a mech. That's a projectile, kinetic, causes damage by striking. A beam weapon hypothetically does the same thing. It's going to strike the target. It's not going to be an area effect around the target, is it? Is it a pinpoint? Does it go right through the armor? No. But eventually, if held on the target, it's going to do some heat damage, because that's the whole point, right? The beam weapon is a heat weapon. Otherwise, what's the point of it? So, there are, remember, Harrison Ford called it a blaster at your side. Well, what's a blaster? Does it fire a kinetic projectile? No. As we know, a so-called blaster, a Klingon, well, a disruptor is different. But a weapon that fires a pulse is actually like our particle projection cannon, PPCs, in the Battletech universe, of which we've obviously adopted or replicated here. It's a pulse of energy. Pew, pew, right. It is. And it's like, what is it? It's a photon torpedo in a gun. That's what a blaster is, a photon torpedo. So in other words, click, boom, little thing goes flying out, but that's not a projectile. That's an encapsulated bolt of energy, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Same with a photon torpedo in a starship. Same thing. It's an encapsulated, but remember, they did show this incorrectly. Well, who knows if it's incorrect. Remember the scene where they operated on a photon torpedo? Okay. Well, there had to be a lot of people monkeying around with the technology and the facts of how it was being presented to come up with that. Because everybody was saying, wait a minute, photon torpedo is a photon torpedo. It's not a object, right? But yet, we've seen blueprints for the storyline of Star Trek where they show a photon torpedo as an object. Actual drawings, schematics of what a photon torpedo is. Right? There's some confusion here. You can either adopt the idea that a photon torpedo is an object that is fired and loaded and fired like a projectile, or that it is an encapsulated bolt of energy being fired from the object, from the weapon that's firing it. PPC. Now, okay, does damage when it hits something. In space, damages a shield. If there's no shield, it's going to damage the skin of the object, of the target. Now, heavy laser or laser, light laser, medium laser, heavy laser, right? Super heavy laser. What does that mean? And the reason we're talking about all this is because we're talking about, like we started, how does it affect armor? How do these things translate in practicality to damage to an object, a wall of armor? And what is that armor, by the way? All right. Heavy laser. We've seen recent videos, if you want to call them that, of beam weapons being tested at sea. Okay. I don't care if it's real or not. AI generated or not, doesn't matter. The theory is there. All right. So this heavy laser goes beep, and that beam goes out. Now, the reason I stopped making that noise is because the assumption is you're pulling the trigger, firing the beam, and then letting go, right? You let go of the trigger. The beam stops. Well, what happened to the beam? Is it still traveling? Remember, it's light speed, right? So you're going to pull that trigger, and that beam's going to come out, and then when you release that trigger, what happens to the beam? The beam at the source goes off, but is the beam still flying to its target? Or, like me pointing at the camera, if I press the trigger, well, I'll show it like this. If I press a trigger, the beam's going to go shooting out, and I'm going to strike the camera, and I'm going to hold the trigger, right? And the beam's going to continue to strike the camera. But if I let go, the beam stops, right? The beam doesn't just keep going. Well, that's the question. Does it keep going if I miss the target? So here comes, look at the profile, sideways, perpendicular. I got this beam weapon. I pull the trigger. The beam comes out and it goes, whoosh. But it keeps going. It's just a solid stream of energy, right? Is the frequency, is the power, is the energy at the opening of the weapon the same as the end of the stream where it hits the target? Here's the target, here's the firing weapon. Pull the trigger, the beam comes out. The beam's energy value at the top, at the opening of that weapon, is that the same as when it hits the target? Is the beam energy same all the way except for atmospheric disturbance? Is that beam energy dissipating as it goes toward the target? Assuming it doesn't dissipate. Assuming that the weapon's energy level at the opening is the same as when it hits the target. Let's make that assumption. Okay, so X. Now, atmospheric disturbance, X, half X. Great atmospheric disturbance, X, 1/4 X. You get the idea. That's the concept that you have to think about when you think about armor plating. What does an energy beam do to an armor? How thick does the armor have to be to resist that beam? And how long does the beam have to be in contact with that surface for it to do anything? Hypothetically, assuming, let's put it this way. If it was an EMP pulse, right? An EMP has nothing to do with armor, but when it reaches the target, is that even a good, correct statement? I don't know. An EMP pulse, is it nationwide? An EMP pulse, if it's directed energy beam, an EMP pulse is going to disrupt anything that's susceptible to energy disruption. You might have an object inside a mech that's encased. EMP pulse is fired. Does that thing get affected? This is what we call it's entering into what we call system management. Everything inside the mech is operated by something electrical, mechanical, yada yada. System management. The EMP pulse is going to affect or not, right? Is the technology of the future able to ignore EMP pulses? Do EMP pulses don't even exist anymore because technology changed? Or is it ubiquitous? The EMP pulse is going to affect anything electronic at all. Anything electronic is going to be affected by an EMP pulse. I don't know. Right? A little bit of research. Or a little bit of fictional research. Fictional, hypothetical thinking about whether or not that even applies. But let's assume EMP pulses can't exist. Otherwise, nations would fall in a matter of seconds if you were able to fire an EMP pulse from above, from a starship. And that begs the question, do you ever see it? No. Everybody always has the traditional weapons being fired at a planet concept. We've always said, why are we doing this? Why are we invading this continent? Why are we invading this planet? Why don't we just hit it with EMP pulses and then go down there and pick up what's left? Right? Good question. So that's what this is about, and now I'm tired. Anyway, armor. the effect of beam weapons versus projectile. And in our interpretation of Hex Command NOVA, we have tried to make the difference in as succinct a series of words as we could. Okay? That is where we're at. So, in playing the game versus all the other game rules out there, you'll go, okay, thanks for the video, Terry. Now we kind of understand just how screwed up you guys are. Okay, now we understand, right? You may have read the rules and went, what? Doesn't, really? Why do you do that? Why does all this process have to happen when you're adjudicating a beam weapon versus a projectile weapon? And here's what I'm getting at. You see a mech, right? You got your little reticle and you're, okay, ready, fire. Okay. So here's this mech, stompy, 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 like this, and you see him, you've got your PPC, your heavy laser, yada, yada, beam weapon, and you go boink and you fire at this thing and you hit it. Stop right there. What happens? How do you adjudicate what happens? Okay, now, same thing. Stompy, stompy, stompy. You got your 88 millimeter anti-tank gun. Or 128 millimeter from a Yag Tiger. Right? Crazy, huge, powerful 100 millimeter on an SU-100 on a Russian front tank. Huge, right? Pershing's 90 millimeter. Big, solid shot. Not fin stabilized. We're not talking about modern APSFDS stuff. Not yet. But we can be. Anyway, so the shell comes out. Boom. Shell comes out. And it starts going toward the vehicle. Stompy, stompy, stompy. And the guy's got it fixed right. And he's got it, it's flying. And he hits it. Now, remember, it's a moving target. Not stationary. Stompy, stompy, stompy. Here it comes. Doink. Hits the armor. Just like in World War II. What happens? When the Tiger fires at the Sherman. The Sherman's moving. The guy was just really good. He was really good at leading the target for its current speed. And the thing wasn't going like this. The agility of that Sherman tank was zero. It was just going like this. It's just traveling. It's just going, and here's the you saw it in Fury. Right? Here's the anti-tank gun, the PAC-40. And he's leading the target and hits it. Especially in the 88 scene on the Tiger. They're traveling perpendicular to where the Tiger's located. Tiger leads the target and he hits it. Turret goes flying off because it penetrated and exploded the tank. Okay, nice, cool scene. Right? Happened at Normandy, the German commander. Now it slips in my mind. Anyway. Right? Boom. Same thing. That any tank gun is firing at the projectile firing weapon, doesn't matter we call it any tank gun or not, is firing at this stompy, stompy, stompy mech and he hits it. It's a moving target. Now, if it's stationary, all bets are off. Completely different situation. If you're stationary in the modern era, you're kind of dead. If you're moving in the modern era now, you're kind of dead. If you're in a vehicle of any kind, you're basically kind of, the clock is ticking and as a matter of fact, it's almost up. As soon as you get in that vehicle and you start moving, you're basically, your life is going to be changed in a very, very quick, short period of time. Because of drones? Well, yeah. And that was the other discussion we had the other day about even in Hex Command NOVA, we're the drones. Why do we have pilots in these mechs? How come the mechs aren't drones? Well, maybe they are, right? Maybe the whole thing about someone dying in a vehicle that's stompy walking around like Avatar, maybe that doesn't even exist anymore. By the year 3000, these things are all drones. Where are they operated? Spaceship. What about the communication barrier? Well, okay. Now you drop all these satellites into very low orbit. Forget about EMP pulse. And now the satellites are able to communicate with these things that don't have pilots, and you've got by the way, because of no pilot, you probably can have about 100 of these things walking around. New York City is being invaded by 100 of these walking battle mechs, and believe me, they're not 70 feet tall. That's bullpucky, right? Horse hockey. The fact is, these things are no bigger than what we saw in Avatar. They're personal armor. They're Iron Man times 10, times 8. So Iron Man's height times whatever. Anyway, 35 feet tall, not even. That's what these things are. They've all been shown to be, Pacific Rim. Oh, it's 80 feet. It's 1,000 feet. It's 100,000 yards tall. No. Yeah, right? Because of physics. Even though we may have new physics in the future. The future. Right? The height of the machine, the physics involved, James Cameron can tell you all about this. Right? Foot-pounds per square inch on the ground, especially if that ground is not concrete. Right? If it's muddy, you're going whenever you walk. If you're too big. Or if your foot design isn't appropriate for the planet you're invading. And there we are. So, all things considered, just like NPR, what we're talking about here. And yes, we've had an update to the rules. Oh, and then we changed it, then we fixed it, and we had another update. But yeah, eventually, as of now, right, 2025, you kind of get the idea of what's trying to be attempted for realism balance, simplicity balance, and the amount of time you want to play the game. If you don't have a lot of time to play the game, then you hit, you kill. You hit, you kill. Maybe, a little bit like that. Maybe you hit 3 times, it's dead. If that's all the time you have, well, then that's how you got to play it. It's just a question of degree of damage. Even in our normal game, it's always a degree of damage. And that's what we do. And that's why we still have the roster system. And we probably will always have to have, in this particular kind of warfare, the roster system. Same as in World War II. You have to have a way to track what's happened. And how you simplify that and make it easy to hold in your hand or on your phone. And then, adjudicate or you record what's happening. Because you can't just, you could just ignore the hits and say, oh, did it kill it? No, keep going. All right, fire, did it kill it? No. All right, keep going. That's the only way you can do a non-roster system. Did it kill it? No. How else are you going to do it? You can't have roster on this and not on that. Oh, let's just do roster for movement. Well, wait a minute. See what I'm saying? All right, so that's where we're at. And so thank you. I guess that's about it. We'll talk about the details of the game we got set up and the rostering that we've got and how the guys came together and all that kind of stuff. So thanks.